did you attend primary school?
Well, at Horfield Church Junior School.
And that was, what is?
Well, I must have been about 5 when I went there, and I stayed there till I took the 11 plus when I was 11, and so I was there for all that time.
What was school like for you as a child?
I enjoyed junior school. I enjoyed that night. When I went to the big school afterwards, it was quite a shock to the system. But I enjoyed junior school. I made some friends there. In fact, I've still got a friend there that lives down the road here, that we were in infant school together.
Oh,
yeah.
Did you find school difficult at all?
Not the junior school, no. No.
What were your best and your worst subjects in primary school?
One of my best subjects was English. My worst subject was maths and science, anything maths and sciences, and I can't job to add up now.
Who was your favourite teacher in junior school?
In junior school,
yeah, and why?
oh, Miss Mackey. Miss Mackey, she was a general favourite. Everybody loved Miss Mackey.
What school activities or school sports did you take part in at junior school?
Not really in junior school.
Yes.
Well, not really very many. I can remember we used to all be tipped out in the into the playground and divided into teams of sort of red and yellow and blue and green, and you had the coloured band given you to wear, and you had to go in the teams. But there was I think that was already. I'm never very athletic, and never a very athletic person, and I can remember sports day once a year, which was held in the rectory field, which is over the road, and I think it's still called the rectory field. And I remember that, but I mean, I never won anything. I was never very competitive anyway, and I didn't like sport very much. It wasn't my thing.
Could you describe some of the playground games that you played at junior school?
Well, we used to play quite a few skipping games. Where there were perhaps 3 or 4 or more of you, because 2 would hold the skipping rope and the person would jump in the middle. We used to had all these rhymes like 1, 2, 3, Alera, I'm in love with Sarah. I remember that. I don't know what else it goes on. And there's sort of various things. We used to play ball up against the school wall, because the school was the old school up there, and it had buttresses on the wall, and we used to go out and bag a buttress, because it was a quick tick in the playtimes, and then we'd play ball games up against this sort of buttress at the side, because it all stuck out, and where you hit the ball on the buttress and this sort of thing, And I can remember skipping it, but that's about all really, because if you went down into the main part of that was up by the school door. If you went down into the main part of the school playing field, playground out there, and that's where all the boys used to tear about. And they used to sort of crash into us girls and pull our skipping ropes away. So we kept a bit separate from the boys. We kept up near the school door and played in that little bit up there. So that's about all I can remember about that. I was rather a timid child. I think I was a little bit afraid of the boys. Yeah.
Do you remember any big activities happening at the school, big events or celebrations?
Yes. I do remember one day, we were all turned out into the school playground to sort of line up at the railings there, and further along onto Gloucester Road, where Kellaway Avenue links up with Gloucester Road, there used to be the barracks up there, Horfield Barracks, and the soldiers came marching along from the barracks, and they stood to attention on the common, which was opposite the bit of the common which was opposite the school. And then I think it was 1 or 2 big black cars drove up, and this was during the war years, and these black cars drove up, and the chauffeur got out and opened the door, and the King and Queen got out. And it was not the present Queen, of course, it was her parents, which was George VI and Queen Elizabeth. And they got out and inspected the troops, and of course there was no walkabout then like there is now, but the Queen did turn round and wave to us children. I remember that. And when I got home, and my mother wasn't, I told my mother, and she said to me, I wish I'd put your best coat on. I said, well, Queen wouldn't have picked me out amongst that lot. But I do remember seeing the King and Queen there, and I remember that quite clearly. And we used to have Empire Day. Now, most people now don't know, I was thinking, going back to talking to the children, I mean, they wouldn't have known what the empire was then. I mean, they may learn it later on in geography, but they wouldn't have known then what it was. But it was a day that it was a sort of national holiday, and we used to have the day off because but we used to go to school in the morning, and we had to dress up as somebody in one of the costumes of the British Empire. And then we have a concert on the stage which we would give our mums, because our mums would come down in the morning and watch this, and then we could go home to dinner with our parents, and then we had the rest of the day off. I do remember that was one day a year. I think it was the end of May sometime. It's Empire Day. I remember that. It was at the junior school that we learnt to write with pen and ink. There were no ballpoint pens then, of course. When we started in classes 1, 2 and 3, we had to use pencils, and then when we got into class 4, we had to start learning to write with pen and ink, and the inkwells were sort of in the desks, these individual desks, and the boys used to soak pellets in the inkwells and flit them at the girls, and it was horrible. And the actual writing with the pen was difficult, because a pen that you had to write with was difficult. But you got into it. By the time you got into class 5, you had to write with a pen and ink properly. And spelling, of course, and when you were in class 4, there were 6 spellings put on the top of the blackboard every day, and you had to learn them. And if it was a long word, a difficult word, it would be on the blackboard about 3 or 4 times, different days in succession, so that you could learn to spell it properly. So by the time you got into class 5, you had to be able to spell reasonably well. And I'm so grateful for that, because my spelling's quite reasonable. I can pick out a spelling mistake anywhere, it jumps out at me. And I think it was probably because of that. What I did like was needlework. I've always liked needlework. And in class 3, where we had Miss Mackey as a teacher, she was very much into the sort of church, because the church and the school were very sort of close. The church took a lot of interest in the school. It still does, I believe. And over in the rectory, which was on the opposite corner to the school, and still is, they had a beautiful garden, and a very big garden. And in the summer, when it was a nice day, the class would be divided up. The boys and girls would be separated, and the boys would do woodwork in the classroom, but the girls would be rounded up and taken across the road to the rectory, and we could sit down under the big trees on the grass there and do our needlework. And that was a very pleasant memory from school days, sitting in this big garden sewing or knitting or whatever. And I always liked that. And someone used to read us stories as well while we did that. That's a very sort of pleasant memory from that. Miss Mackey kept silkworms, and the silkworms, of course, ate mulberry leaves, and this was an enormous mulberry tree which was over the road, and sometimes a child would be sent over the road to get some mulberry leaves to feed the silkworms on. And I remember these silkworms. I remember the sort of the silk twisted round the silkworms, and they used, well, I don't know, they used to take it off presumably when it got too big, I don't know. But I do remember this box of silkworms in the classroom. I was between classes 3 and 4. The September then, when she went up to class 4, that was when the war broke out. And they had air raid shelters were being built everywhere, and the church hall is on the opposite corner of the road, sort of near the rectory, and they built the air raid shelters for the school behind the church hall. And when the sirens went, we had to line up quickly, and we were all ushered across the road and into the shelters. Now, my memory of the shelters is cold and wet and smelly, because they were very damp inside, so they must have stayed wet and horrible, and they were very smelly and horrible. The teachers would take sort of lamps, what do you call them, these portable lamps with them over there, and light them sometimes, and would read to us perhaps from the light of the lamp, or we would play games like Chinese whispers and that in the hurricane lamps. That's the name, I couldn't think of it. Name of the hurricane lamps they'd take with them, and we play games like Chinese whispers and that sort of thing in the shelter. We all had to take our gas masks to school. Everybody had to take their gas mask with them, and wherever they went, they were sort of in square boxes, and they wore them with a strap, and they wore them over your shoulder with a strap. And at school, we used to have what they call shelter rations. Now they were tins, usually a cocoa tin, usually a small size cocoa tin on a bit of string, worn on the other shoulder, and they would have your shelter rations, anything you could scrounge from home, maybe a couple of sweets or a couple of biscuits or something in there, or a bit of elastoplast in case anybody hurt themselves. And there was all sorts of bits in them, and we used to sort of vie a bit with our shelter rations to see who would have the best ones or the nicest ones. I remember that. And there was one boy who always had a large cocoa tin full of stuff, and we were very envious of him. And he used to have chocolate in there as well, which was, it was on the ration at the time, so I don't know where he got his chocolate from, but I do remember him eating his chocolate in front of us.